Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for today's Tea Talk video. If you follow me on Twitter, then you might have seen that these last couple of weeks they've not been the best for me in terms of my mental health. So that's one of the main reasons that my posting has been quite sporadic recently. That, and also because I had exams which I was focusing on. But hopefully from here on out we can get back to our regular schmegular programming and we won't have too many interruptions. Today's topic of conversation is one that I am extremely passionate about. I'm passionate about all the subject matter that we cover on this Tea Talk series, but this particular topic is one that hits pretty close to home for me and millions of other South Africans. It is Youth Month. We've just recently had the national elections. We are in the last month of the second quarter of the year. All of those factors put together make this topic particularly relevant, and today what we'll be talking about is youth unemployment in South Africa. If you like what I do, if you enjoy this series, please do consider subscribing to my channel. It means the absolute world to me. Let's try get a conversation started in the comment section about youth unemployment and what we can do to fight it. What I'm drinking today is one of my favorites. It's Fresh Pack Rooibos green tea. I love green tea. It's got no sugar, no honey, no sweetener. It's literally just plain green tea, just the way that I like it. Go ahead and grab your own cup of tea, grab a snack, get comfortable, because today's video is a pretty long video. We've got a lot to talk about, a lot to cover, and without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, it is Youth Month, and in this month of June, South Africans commemorate the 1976 June 16th Soweto uprising, where more than 15,000 students took to the streets to protest against the Bantu education policies that the apartheid government at the time wanted to put in place. Obviously, this video is not about our education system, so why am I bringing it up? Why am I talking about it? First and foremost, I want to highlight the power of the voice of the youth. From the Bantu education policies protest in 1976 to fees must fall in 2015, the youth has always been at the center of change. In every generation, the youth is the foundation and the leaders of the next generation. The second reason that I brought it up is that I want us to be able to compare and contrast the difference between the youth of 1976 and the youth of today. Back in 1976, the youth was fighting against apartheid. Today, we have a different struggle. Today, what we are fighting against is the high rate of youth unemployment in this country. Unemployment refers to people who are not employed but have taken steps to look for a job or to start a business and are available for a job if one was offered to them. A little bit later in this video, I'm going to be speaking about what I believe to be some of the biggest barriers to employment, the long-term effects of unemployment, and what a high rate of unemployment means for our country as a whole. But for now, let me just enlighten you with some facts and figures about unemployment. To be completely honest, I'm probably going to scare you more than enlighten you. But I feel it's important for all of us to have a big picture view of what is going on before we really dig deep into this topic. In South Africa, the unemployment rate measures the number of people actively looking for a job as a percentage of the total labor force. It's basically simple maths. It's just X number of people actively looking for a job over X number of people that are eligible to work times 100, and from that we get our unemployment rate as a percentage. And this unemployment rate is generally released on a quarterly basis. What that means is that in the second quarter of the year, we get the results from the first quarter of the year. And the first quarter of the year runs from January to March, second quarter from April to June, and so on until the final quarter of the year, which runs from October to December. If you want more information about anything that I talk about today, I do strongly encourage you to check out the links that I'll leave in the description box. In the first quarter of 2019, our unemployment rate rose by half a percentage point from 27.1% in the fourth quarter of 2018 to 27.6% in the first quarter of 2019. Granted, this rise in unemployment is to be expected in the first quarter of the year because the temporary staff that are hired during the busy festive season are dismissed in the new year. The worrying part isn't necessarily that the unemployment rate rose between the last quarter of the previous year and the first quarter of this year. What is worrisome is that this is the highest unemployment rate that we have seen since the third quarter of 2017. But to keep things as current as possible and to allow for fair comparison, let's take a look at the first quarter of 2018. In the first quarter of 2018, the jobless rate was at 26.7%, almost a full percentage point lower than what it was in the first quarter of this year. 1% seems like a fairly immaterial figure, and you're probably thinking it's 1%, surely it's not that many people that were affected by unemployment, but it really is a lot of people. So let's just pretend that in both 2018 and 2019, South Africa had a population of 56 million people. And now let's further pretend that of those 56 million people, half of them were eligible to work. So half of them were between the ages of 15 and 64. Obviously, we know that this is unrealistic because a lot of people below the age of 15 are working and people well over the age of 64 are working. This old age of working is clearly demonstrated in our parliament. Before these elections, in 2018, less than 6% of our parliament was made up of individuals under the age of 35. To me, that's pretty concerning because South Africa is not an aging population. What I mean by that is that we have a greater percentage of young people than we do old people. The median age in our parliament in 2018 was 56 years old. And 56-year-olds can't really relate to what 35 and under people go through. It's a completely different generation, raised in different times. So to have a parliament that's essentially an old age home is a little bit concerning to me. But anyway, back to mathematics. What we said is that 28 million people are eligible to work. Based on the aforementioned unemployment rates, in 2018, 7,476,000 people were unemployed. A year later, in 2019, 7,728,000 people were unemployed. That less than 1% difference is 252,000 jobs. That's 252,000 people. But more than that, it's 252,000 families that are affected by unemployment. But these numbers were just pretend, so let's take a look at the real figures. According to the quarterly labor force survey for the third quarter of 2018, there were 16.3 million people and 6.2 million unemployed people between the ages of 15 and 64 in South Africa. In total, our labor force was made up of 22.5 million people. That's 22.5 million people that were legally eligible to work. Okay, it's all good and well to talk about how terrible the unemployment rate is and to compare it to the previous year, but to get a full understanding of the situation, I think it best to compare it to what it was at its worst and what it was at its best. The highest unemployment rate in post-apartheid South Africa was recorded in the first quarter of 2003 at 31.2%. The lowest was in the fourth quarter of 2008 at 21.5%. Between 2000 and 2019, our unemployment rate has averaged at 25.66%. Let me draw your attention to two major points that I just made. Since discussing the unemployment rate, I have yet to mention a figure below 20%. Consistently, through the years, 1 in 5 South Africans has been unemployed. With an almost 20-year average presented, at least a quarter of our workforce is unemployed. The second major point that I want you to engage with is the fact that the record low of unemployment in South Africa was recorded in 2008. For those of you that might be too young to remember, or perhaps you've just forgotten or you don't follow global financial news as closely, it's quite important to understand the significance of the year 2008 both in South Africa and on the global scale. 2008 was the year of one of the world's biggest economic recessions since the Great Depression. Globally, the real estate market took a huge hit, particularly in America as well as in South Africa. The mining industry took a major hit, and as South Africa is famous for its minings, that's one of our biggest exports is in our mining industry, that had a huge effect on us. I very clearly remember the economic crisis that was 2008. I remember seeing on the news that people were losing their jobs, companies were going under, and At some point, it was almost on a weekly basis that the price of petrol and bread would go up and up and up to seemingly no end. So now the question is, if globally we were in a recession, if our economy was truly so unstable, how did we manage to reach a record low unemployment rate in the fourth quarter of 2008? I believe the answer to this is twofold. Generally, in the fourth quarter of the year, the unemployment rate will see a slight decrease due to the temporary employment provided by the busy festive season. Second, and this is a great place to put in a disclaimer, I'm not a financial analyst, so what I'm about to say is just my theory, it's just my opinion. 2008 was just 2 years before South Africa hosted the 2010 FIFA World Cup. During this time, there was quite a lot happening in our country in terms of the workforce. Contractors for building and upgrading stadiums, the manufacturing and textile industry was working quite a bit in terms of manufacturing merchandise. Food industry was also getting their hands in there, employment in marketing and PR for the World Cup. So there was a lot of work to go around, and that's my theory, that the reason that the unemployment rate in 2008 was so low was because of the upcoming FIFA World Cup. The figures I've been giving are a look at our country's unemployment rates as a whole. But to truly understand what this means for us, what it means in terms of equality and socioeconomic status, we need to bring in a microscope. We need to dig deeper. We need to break it down just a little bit more. First, we'll take a look at these numbers according to gender, and thereafter we will break it down according to everybody's favorite method of classification, race. I'm being facetious. Between the fourth quarter of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019, the unemployment rate for women fell by 0.2 percentage points from 29.5% to 29.3%. And that's great for women. I'd attribute this to the ever-changing climate in business. More and more women are seeking and pursuing a higher education and training. They are starting their own businesses. They're climbing up the corporate ladder. They are moving forward and moving up in their respective fields. And for the first time in South African history, we now have a cabinet that has a 50-50 gender split. I'll give that point to our dear president, but don't get too excited yet. He's gonna lose a lot more points throughout the course of this video. On a less positive note, the unemployment rate did in fact increase for men by an entire percentage point from 25.1% at the end of 2018 to 26.1% at the beginning of 2019. Still, a smaller percentage of men are unemployed as compared to women, and it's a significantly smaller percentage at that. But are we surprised? Absolutely not. Our society is built on patriarchy and misogyny, amongst other harmful practices and principles. No matter how you want to spin it, no matter how many Fortune 500 CEOs are female, business leaders are female, world changers are female, the cold hard truth is that this is a man's world and we're just living in it with fairly limited power and control to change it. But that in no way means that we cannot change it. So moving swiftly along to our favorite means of comparison, let's take a look at these numbers according to race. In South Africa, there are 4 main population groups, namely African or Black, Colored, Indian or Asian, and White. If you'll allow me to go slightly off topic for a second, I must say that I find it incredibly surprising, ignorant, nonsensical, any other negative adjective that comes to mind, that in this day and age, in this new world of globalization, of mass access to information, of mass migration, we are still using race as a means of human classification. Racial classification is still a thing. We need to accept that race is an illusion created primarily by colonizers with the purpose of segregating and dehumanizing those with just a touch more melanin than John Smith. Racial classification is quite simply a way to brainwash an entire subset of a population to believe that they are not worthy of some of life's most simple and basic needs, wants, and pleasures. It is also a way to incite a sense of superiority even within a racial group and amongst minority groups as well. In apartheid South Africa, a white man's life was the most valuable of all. Coming in second was the life of an Asian or Indian man, and then followed the life of a colored man. Finally, the most worthless, most insignificant life was that of a black man. This sense of value is strongly reflected in even today's unemployment rate. I'll get to that in just a minute, but let me explain why I said what I said about the absurdity and the ludicrous nature of racial classification. With South Africa's very inclusive, comprehensive racial classification system, which category would you place a Mexican person? What is the appropriate box to check for an Australian Aboriginal person? Should Hawaiian, Maori, and Samoan people be classified as colored? Or are they better suited to check the Indian/Asian box at Home Affairs? This is obviously a very vast subject matter with strong links to colorism, colonialism, tribalism, and a whole lot of other isms. So I think it best if I tackle it in a separate video on its own. If isms is a topic that you want me to go in depth on in this series, let me know by leaving a like on this video. But let's get back to unemployment. For white people, their unemployment rate decreased between the fourth quarter of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019 from 7.6% to 6.6%. Indians and Asians also saw a decrease in their unemployment rate from 12.4% to 11.4%.
So far so good, am I right?
For colored people, their unemployment rate increased from 21.6% to 22.6%. And finally, for Africans, our unemployment rate increased from 30.4% to 31.1%. Now, there are a lot of reasons as to why these figures are so incredibly different. Obviously, the larger a population group, the more unemployed people will exist in that population group because there's more people to be unemployed. I have a confession to make. In all this time that we've been speaking about unemployment, with all the facts and figures and stats that I've given you, I have yet to mention our topic of conversation, which is specifically youth unemployment. We have not at all spoken about youth unemployment, and as you can see by the title of this video, that is our topic of conversation today. It's specifically youth unemployment. So let's go ahead and speak about that. There are two distinctions to make here, as the data is different for the two groups that I'm going to speak about. Generally, when I speak about youth, I'm referring to individuals aged between 15 and 34. But now the second group that I will also be speaking about is young unemployed graduates, and those are people aged between 15 and 24. But why am I even making this video? Why did I spend nearly half of this video giving an economics lecture and not just specifically talking about youth unemployment? Simply, we as the youth are the beneficiaries of the economy. When our time comes, we will essentially inherit the economy. Are we willing to inherit an economy where over a quarter of our population is unemployed? Are we willing to further contribute to this demon of unemployment and stay in this cycle of giving generations to come a shit show of an economy to work with? Personally, I am not willing to accept this future that is seemingly written in stone. I refuse to sit idly by and watch as our mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters struggle to support our families. And that is why I'm making this video. I'm making this video to give you an opportunity to add to the conversation of youth unemployment amongst your own peers, amongst people that can actually immerse themselves in your lived experience because they too are living that life. What are you willing to do to change our future for the better? To be completely unfiltered and honest with you, the burden of unemployment is concentrated amongst us as the youth. If we turn our national unemployment rate of 27.6% to a total, so now we've made it 100%, we make up 63.4% of the total number of unemployed persons. Of the 27.6% that is our national unemployment rate, we make up 63.4%. Let's get rid of the rest of the population. Let's focus solely on the youth. For youth aged 15 to 24, our unemployment rate rose from 54.4% in the fourth quarter of 2018 to 55.2% in the first quarter of 2019. We are currently at the highest level of youth unemployment since the second quarter of 2017. I'm graduating fairly soon, and these next figures, they scare me. I stay awake at night. I have panic attacks. I'm constantly thinking about the numbers that I'm about to mention. I'm always thinking about them because not only am I scared, but what I am is actually terrified. I'm terrified for myself. I'm terrified for what this means for my future, but most importantly, I'm terrified for what this means for my family. Amongst graduates in the 15 to 24 age group, so holders of degrees, diplomas, certificates of higher education and training, amongst that group, the unemployment rate increased from 19.5% in the fourth quarter of 2018 to 31% in the first quarter of 2019. Saying those numbers out loud makes me feel sick. That is an increase of 11.5% quarter on quarter, from 19.5% to 31%. The good-ish news is that this massive jump can mostly be attributed to new graduates entering the workforce, with 85.7% of young unemployed graduates being first-time entrants. The great news is that employers are seeking graduates, and as we move through the fourth industrial revolution, the demand for graduates will continue to rise. According to the Department of Labor's latest Job Opportunities and Employment Report that was released in November of 2018, overall, 38.6% of the total job vacancies advertised between 2017 and 2018 required people with a degree or diploma educational achievement. This is a clear indication that there is a shift to a more educated labor force, leading to an increasing share in high-skilled jobs in the economy. I think at this point in the video is the perfect opportunity to confront the legacies of our history. Under apartheid, the law was used to remove black people from cities and to prevent them from acquiring skills or getting high-status jobs. This resulted in an oversupply of unskilled laborers, and generally, if there is an oversupply of something, its value and its cost will reduce significantly, and that's exactly what happened. Owners of business enterprises could readily exploit black workers, paying them well below enough to live and to support their families, because at the time, and in even some cases today, black labor was cheap. You won't be surprised to find out that a black person with the same or higher qualifications, with the same or more experience in the same or sometimes even more senior position is often paid much less than a white person. I'm genuinely thrilled that more and more South Africans, particularly black and colored South Africans, are overcoming insurmountable barriers and achieving degrees, achieving diplomas, getting an education. I'm thrilled that we're doing this because the graduate unemployment rate is significantly lower than unemployment rates amongst youth with lower educational levels. This suggests that education is absolutely vital in improving our prospects in the South African job market. But for many reasons, many people still can't pursue a higher education. Many people still can't even get a basic education due to their circumstances. According to Stats SA, their latest report shows that of the 6.1 million unemployed people in the fourth quarter of 2018, 57.1% had an education level below matric, 34.2% had a matric, 6.3% had some form of FET qualification, and only 1.7% were graduates. There are approximately 10.3 million people aged between 15 and 24 in the first quarter of 2019. Between the fourth quarter of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019, the percentage of young persons aged 15 to 24 who were not in employment, education, or training increased by 2.1 percentage points from 31.2% to 33.1%. That's 3.4 million South Africans that are not in employment, education, or training. Of the 20.3 million young people aged 15 to 34, 40.7% were not in employment, education, or training. So we have 55% of our youth that are not employed, and then we have 40% that are not pursuing any form of formal education. Okay guys, so this next clip has been giving me so much trouble. I have filmed and refilmed it, not even exaggerating, no less than about 5 times. Every single time that I go to edit the video, this clip just disappears. Every single time, it's just not there. So I've decided that this next portion, I'll do it as a voiceover, and yeah, then the rest of the video will be like normal. It's all good and well to scare you with numbers and to just spit facts for half an hour, but these facts and numbers, they don't mean anything without an explanation as to why they are significant and what they actually mean for the average, most likely unemployed South African. Okay. Raise your hand if you have ever felt personally victimized by a job posting. A major barrier to employment is job requirements. Now, I completely understand why qualifications are necessary and certain job requirements are necessary, but more often than not, job requirements are used as a means of discrimination. No prizes for who can guess who the main target of discrimination is. Raise your hand if you have ever come across a job posting that said at least one of the following: must have own transport and valid driver's license. Do employers know that the price of cool drink can be 2,000 Rand at the licensing department? Must have 5 years experience in the field. And this is a job posting for an entry-level job, so graduates will definitely have 5 years work experience after 4 years of varsity. Definitely plausible. And now my personal favorites. Must be fluent in English and Afrikaans. Look, South Africa boasts having racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity. We have the 3rd highest number of official languages in the world, 11 official languages. I understand the need to be fluent in English since it's popularly considered as a universal language, so I'm going to let that one slide. But tell me why fluency in Afrikaans is a prerequisite for employment. Personally, I've never come across a job post that stated that one must be fluent in any of the other 9 official languages in order to be considered for employment. Like I said, I'm quarter to graduating, and in the last year and a half, I've been obsessively looking at job postings, not only in my field of study, but in multiple other industries as well. And in my search, in my job perusals, not once have I ever come across a job posting asking for fluency in Xitsonga, in Siswati, in Venda, in Xhosa. Not once have I ever come across that. So I'm not going to waste anybody's time dissecting and dismantling that particular requirement because we all know exactly what it means. A developing country such as our own is quite heavily reliant on investor spending, and investor spending is heavily affected by things like perceived levels of corruption, mismanagement of funds, a stagnant labor force, and the biggest thing that affects investor spending is politics and political instability. In Africa, politics are pretty much a nightmare. A current example that I can give is the situation happening in Sudan. Since the president stepped down, an intermittent military government took over, and in the last couple of days, not even like the last couple of years, weeks, months, in the last couple of days, hundreds of people have been killed. hundreds of women have been raped, hundreds of children have been murdered. And no investor is going to want to invest in a country that's quartered to civil war. If you want me to cover what's happening in Sudan, do a sort of get ready with me, or even add it to the Tea Talk series, let me know in the comments down below and I'll be sure to do that. Like I said, these things affect investor spending, and investor spending affects our economy, and our economy has a major effect on the rates of unemployment. Unemployment is the greatest challenge to socio-economic developments in South Africa, and youth unemployment specifically is the greatest challenge to social development in our country. It further increases the gap between socio-economic classes and creates a more unequal society. South Africa has one of the most unequal societies in the world. Not only do we have one of the most unequal societies in the world, but we also have one of the highest rates of unemployment in the world. On a global scale, South Africa ranks 9th in terms of countries with the highest rates of unemployment. All the other countries with high levels of unemployment in the top 10 group have relatively small populations in comparison to South Africa. This is a problem that feeds and perpetuates a number of our country's biggest problems, such as poverty, inequality, and crime. And on that note, let's talk about how unemployment affects the average person looking for work and leaves them vulnerable to criminals. Being unemployed puts a target on your back. Opportunistic criminals see your desperation and they act on it. I'm just gonna wait for these dogs to keep quiet. A couple of days ago, I read a thread on Twitter about a man who had been unemployed for some time, and he came across This man was approached by another guy, and he told him that his wife's place of work was hiring. So obviously not wanting to miss out on an opportunity for employment, he sent his CV through, and luckily for him, his application was successful and he got a job. The person who told him about the job, we'll call him Mr. A, and then the newly employed man, we'll call him Mr. B. After Mr. B got the job, Mr. A expected Mr. B to pay him a percentage of his salary as a means of compensation for telling him about the job. So when month end came, Mr. A would call up Mr. B demanding money from him because he told him about this job opportunity. This is just one of many scenarios that demonstrates how someone can be exploited due to their status of employment. Another way is that criminals commonly target job seekers through recruitment scams, and oftentimes these recruitment scams are about posts in government. If anyone ever approaches you about a job in government and tells you that in order to secure employment, you need to pay some sort of fee, it's a scam. If that job... Oh my goodness, my neighbor's dogs. If that job is not posted on the department's official website, on their official social media pages, in the government gazette, or in a reliable newspaper, it's a scam. Ladies especially are often targets for human trafficking. Back in March, in our legalization of sex work video, I briefly touched on human trafficking. I'm still to do an entire video solely dedicated on human trafficking and its different components, but for now I just want to touch on human trafficking in relation to unemployment. So this works by a well-dressed man or a well-dressed woman. They usually use women to create a false sense of safety and security. So a well-dressed man or a well-dressed woman will approach you telling you about an amazing dance opportunity in Europe. They even show you pictures of all the different dances there. They show you pictures of the clubs, telling you about how much you'll earn. And obviously, if you are a South African working in Europe, where you'll be earning in euros, once you convert those euros to rands, those numbers will have you seeing stars. And anyone would jump at the opportunity if it were real. Once you leave for this supposedly amazing dance opportunity in Europe, your friends and family, they'll never see you again. You will be sold off for various forms of human trafficking. Now you're all alone in a foreign country, most likely with no money, most likely not knowing anyone. And basically, you have no chance of escape. By the time you watch this video, we will have already had the SONA, which is the State of the Nation address. And most likely, we'll probably have the new figures on unemployment and the new figures on job creation and our GDP. But I just want you to take a moment to look at the images on screen right now. That is the reality for so many South Africans, for so many youth, for so many people that have graduated, that are qualified, but jobs are not there. Right now, companies are failing to pay employees. Companies are failing to create jobs. And all our president can give us is empty promises. He just tells us what we already know, that we are struggling. Yes, we know we're struggling. We're living that reality every single day. But what is he doing to change that? What is he doing to improve job creation? What is he doing? What is our government doing to better the status quo? The labor market and its activity, or in our case, its inactivity, plays a vital role in a country's gross domestic product, or GDP. And as such, a country's GDP is heavily influenced by its labor force. It would make sense then that the more people that are employed and are actively participating in the labor force, the more people will be able to participate in the economy as consumers. And to further that statement, the more consumers we have, the more the economy can grow. There'll be an increase in the production of goods and services. There'll be increased tax revenue. There might even be more job creation, greater investor confidence, and as such, a growth in GDP. Our dear President, Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's talk about him for a second. Before I tackle the issue of GDP, let me tackle the issue of skilled laborers leaving the South African economy to pursue more lucrative opportunities in other countries. In the run-up to the recent national elections, the president made what I believe to not only be a divisive, but also extremely ignorant statement. I'm paraphrasing here, but basically the gist of what he said is that employers should do their utmost best to ensure the retention of young white employees because, according to our president, the loss of young white employees specifically is a national crisis. White people leaving for Australia is basically a meme at this point. To say that I'm disappointed is an understatement. Quite frankly, I'm angry. I'm disgusted that a man that looks like me by the color of our skin, a man that was damn near the forefront of the struggle for the liberation of black people, a man that is supposed to be a leader of a nation that is made up of 70% black people, can make such a statement. Yes, it may not be as easy for us as black people to pick up and jet off to any corner of the world and find new opportunities. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. So how dare a president that in his campaign spoke about furthering the plight of black people to ensure a more equal society would undermine and dismiss the value of black workers? A president that is supposed to be for all people be so disrespectful as to disregard the struggles of his brothers and sisters by implying that our labor is not as worthy as that of a young white employees. Mr. President, being a billionaire won't change the color of your skin. Sincerely, a young black woman who is proud of what her skin represents. Resilience. In his campaign for leadership of the ANC party and ultimately the country, Mr. President promised a growth of 5% yearly for our GDP. Now that 5% is not just a random number that he plucked out of thin air. It's a number of significance because according to economists, in order for our unemployment rate to be significantly reduced or to see somewhat of a reduction, we need to have a 3 to 5% growth in our GDP on a year-to-year basis. No matter how you calculate it, there is absolutely no way that the president will be able to fulfill his pledge. First of all, the GDP hasn't expanded by more than 2% a year since 2013. Second of all, we are unlikely to have a 5% growth in our GDP. In the first quarter of this year, our GDP was less 3.2% from the previous year. Since we're already sitting at a GDP that has fallen by 3.2% in the first quarter of the year, the president will need to ensure an overall growth of 8.2% in these next 3 quarters in order to fulfill his pledge. I'm not a financial analyst, I'm not an economist, but I don't think it takes a mathematician to know that that's never going to happen. I've already mentioned a couple of reasons as to why we have such a high unemployment rate in South Africa, our history being one of them. But now it's time to talk about a reason that was actually initially positive for South Africa. From around 1995 until the global recession in 2008, we were actually in a long period of economic growth, and this period of economic growth was not one of jobless growth. What this means is that the rate at which people were entering the labor market far exceeded the rate of job creation. And what resulted is that we had more employed people and more unemployed people at the same time. What our unemployment problem shows is that the demand for labor has not kept up with the relative abundance of both skilled and unskilled labor in South Africa. For this, I blame the monopolization of industries. Of the many industries that we have, finance, transport, electricity, telecommunications, and a whole lot of others, there are only few players involved in those industries, and oftentimes those few selected players are involved in more than one industry. The Ruperts, the Steinhoffs, heck, even the Guptas. My more politically inclined viewers will label this as white monopoly capital. Personally, I wouldn't necessarily refer to it as that because the Guptas, the Zumas, the Ramaphosas, the Mutsepes, they're not white. Yet they still contribute to and benefit from the monopolization of industry. There's a reason why in some countries, the United States for example, there are laws in place to prevent the monopolization of industries. If only one group or company is involved in or dominates the market, it leads to a lack of competition. It stifles innovation, and it keeps new, smaller companies from entering the market, which in turn will result in a lack of job creation. If you study on Wits Medical Campus, you will experience firsthand the effects of a monopoly.
That's my opinion!
With no competition, companies are at liberty to set their prices as high as they want to. This will negatively affect investors, consumers, and the job market as well. Another reason for our high unemployment rate is the fact that we live in a low trust society, and this establishes excessive bureaucracy. The effect of this is that employers won't take the risk of considering applicants with little work experience or lower qualifications. And once again, as the wheel keeps turning, this will reduce employment below its potential. Finally, it's damn near impossible to create jobs when no one is investing in that country. Unfortunately, the continental African political climate as a whole is not investor friendly at the moment, with MPs dropping like flies, inquiries after inquiries, commissions after commissions, SOE bailouts after SOE bailouts, and the literal genocide taking place in Sudan right now. Our leaders are not doing us any favors. The government released a statement in reaction to the jobs numbers, and what they said was, our high rate of unemployment is a serious concern. They further said that a number of interventions were being implemented in order to revive and stimulate economic growth, and these interventions included the Youth Employment Service, Job Summit, the President's 2018 Economic Stimulus Recovery Plan, and investment conferences. Look, as much as I would love to sit around a braai, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, no amount of talking and debating at a job summit is going to fix our problem. The only solution to our problem is economic growth and job creation. The only way we'll be able to lift people out of unemployment and poverty is through economic growth and job creation. In order to do that, the right policies, political programs, efficient government, and efficient government spending needs to be in place in order to foster and maintain an environment that will allow for the growth of businesses and individuals. If the government is really serious about job creation and growing the economy instead of just looting state resources, the time to show instead of tell is now. A high unemployment rate such as what we have in South Africa is indicative of an inefficient economy and inefficient policies with respect to business and labor. But most concerning is that high rates of long-term unemployment indicate that labor markets themselves are inefficient. So in closing, my last point will just be a brief overview of long-term unemployment. I've literally been sitting here for about 6 hours filming, so it's time for me to wrap this up. Long-term unemployment refers to people that have been unemployed for 12 months or more. And unsurprisingly, people that are most affected by long-term unemployment are women and the youth, with the youth aged between 15 and 35 making up 2/3 of the population that has been in long-term unemployment. As someone who has been very closely affected by long-term unemployment, I can tell you that it is stressful. Mentally, emotionally, physically, it's nothing but stress. Once someone has been in long-term unemployment, the probability of finding a job declines, and this puts them at risk of being permanently detached from the labor market and thus permanently unemployed. What then does our future look like if 2/3 of those in long-term unemployment are the youth? So I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this topic of youth unemployment. What innovative strategies do you think we can use to fight youth unemployment? What options should we look into, whether it be starting our own businesses, working abroad, fighting for changes in policies? Let me know in the comment section down below. I read and reply to every single comment. All I ask is that when we engage in conversation and debate, we just remain respectful of each other's opinions and views. If you have stuck around until this part, you are a trooper. I'm gonna take a nap immediately after filming because I'm exhausted. But if you enjoyed this video and you are enjoying this Tea Talk series, do go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you once again for watching. Bye. The labor market and its activity, or every time I open my mouth to speak, this dog starts barking. Every time.